My son left me without gas to get to the doctor, and hours later, I saw him buying flowers for his mother-in-law with my card. There are pains that medicine can't cure, only dignity. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. The tank was completely empty when I left the house that Tuesday morning in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Not one tick below the reserve, not a quarter tank. Empty. As if someone had siphoned every last drop of gas from my modest, aging Honda Civic, the car I had paid for with my own hands over 5 years of work as a seamstress, specializing in wedding and prom dresses near South Philly. My fingers trembled as I turned the key one more time, hoping to hear the familiar purr of the engine, but there was only silence. A silence that smelled of abandonment and tasted of held-back tears. I had a doctor's appointment at 11. Dr. Stern, the same doctor who had cared for my late husband, Arthur, during his final months. It was a heart checkup I had postponed for weeks, but the dizzy spells had worsened, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was breaking inside me every time I climbed the stairs in my own house. My house. The 3-bedroom house in the Passyunk Square area that I had inherited from my parents, where David, my 38-year-old son, had lived with his wife, Chelsea, and their 2 daughters since his computer business folded 2 years ago. The same house where I now felt like an unwanted tenant, asking permission to use my own car, to open my own fridge, to sit in my own living room. "Going to the doctor again, Mom?" David had said the night before, serving himself a generous portion of the slow-cooked pot roast I'd prepared since 5 that morning. "Don't you think you're exaggerating a little with all these checkups?" His words landed on the wooden table like stones in a still pond. Chelsea didn't even look up from her phone, scrolling with that practiced indifference she had perfected since the day she first set foot in my house. "It's just a routine check, son," I replied, serving a plate for Chelsea, too, though I knew she'd later complain that the food was too rich. "The doctor says I need to watch my heart. Your father, Dad isn't here to worry about that anymore." David cut me off with a coldness that pierced me like a needle. "And we can't be rushing to the hospital every time you feel a twinge. Besides, we need the car tomorrow. Chelsea has to take the girls to her mom's place, and then we're looking at some properties near the Jersey Shore. A friend of Chelsea's found us a great investment opportunity." Investment. That word he always used when it came to spending money they didn't have on projects that never worked. Like the small computer business that had absorbed my life savings. Over $15,000 that I had saved dollar by dollar during 30 years of sewing, and which was now just a bitter memory and a defunct office near Center City. "And how am I supposed to get to the hospital?" I asked, my voice smaller than I would have liked. "Well, walk," said Chelsea without looking up. "Or take a cab. That's what your money is for, right?" My money. As if the 200 AMONTH or FROMMYWIDOWASSOCIALSECURITYAND PENSIONWEREAFORTUNE WHENHALFOFITWENT TOTHECHEHOUSEHOLDEXPE NSESOFT HEHEUSETHEY OCCUPIEDASIFITWERETHEIRS to 100 a month. From my widow as Social Security and pension. We're a fortune. When half of it went to the household expense as of the house, they occupied as if it were theirs, as if the 50 a week I gave them for groceries were an insignificant contribution to a family economy that I sustained without anyone acknowledging it. That morning, standing next to my gassed-out car, I remembered the conversation with a clarity that hurt. I also remembered the aroma of the pot roast that had filled the kitchen since dawn, the sweet steam of the potatoes I had mashed with my own arthritic but still strong hands. I had cooked with love, as always, hoping that maybe tonight would be different, that maybe they would ask how I felt, or if I needed anything, or simply include me in their conversations about the future. But no. I had just been another meal served by the invisible woman who also paid the bills. I went inside and looked in my purse for the last 30. IHADUNTILTHENEXTDEPOSIT. ENMYMENTALCALCULATIONS WHICHIAGEDLEARNEDTOMAKEDWITHERESPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISPERISperis, I had until the next deposit. In my mental calculations, which I had learned to make with a bookkeeper's precision, after years of stretching, ever I dollar that. 30 had to cover the taxi, the doctor's visit, and the medications they would surely prescribe. There was no margin for error. No extra money for emergencies. Just the cruel math of survival on a pension that evaporated every 2 weeks like water on the hot August pavement. I called 3 taxi companies. The cheapest quoted me $20 to Jefferson University Hospital. Round trip, 40. I was already over budget before I even saw the doctor. I sat on the edge of my bed, the same matrimonial bed where I had slept with Arthur for 24 years, and which now felt too big and too cold every night. My hands trembled as I dialed Dr. Stern's office. "Excuse me, doctor," I said to the receptionist, my voice cracking like old paper. "Would it be possible to change my appointment to next week? An unforeseen complication came up. An unforeseen complication. As if being abandoned by your own son in a moment of need was something that happened by chance, like rain or a power outage. Mrs. Davis, the next available appointment is 6 weeks from now," the receptionist replied with that professional patience people use when speaking with the elderly. "The doctor's schedule is very full. 6 weeks. 42 more days of waking up with that feeling that my heart was jumping out of my chest every time I climbed the stairs. 42 more nights of waking up at 3 in the morning with that pressure in my chest that reminded me too much of Arthur's last days. "It's okay," I murmured. "Keep the appointment for today, please." I hung up the phone and sat there, looking out the window at the backyard where Arthur had planted 2 peach trees the year before he died. The trees had grown. They bore small but sweet fruit every summer. But now, in October, only the bare branches remained, moving in the wind like arms reaching for help, like me. The sound of voices in the living room pulled me from my thoughts. David and Chelsea were arguing about money, about a balance that didn't add up, about expenses that had spiraled out of control. Their voices were muffled through the thin walls of the house, but I could make out loose words. Card, limit, debt. I peeked through the crack in the door. Chelsea held my debit card, the same one I had given them for emergencies last year, and which they had used as if it were theirs ever since. The same card connected to the account where my pension was deposited every 2 weeks. "I don't understand why it's blocked," Chelsea was saying with that irritation she reserved for anything that interrupted her plans. "It had a balance yesterday." "Let me see," said David, taking the card and examining it as if it were a defective object. "Mom must have made some weird transaction. You know how she is with technology. How I am. As if my age were a mental disability that prevented me from managing my own money. As if my 65 years of life, including 30 of keeping the family finances up to date, hadn't taught me anything about administration. The truth was that I had blocked the card the week before, when I discovered they had spent $115 at a Rittenhouse Square bistro while I was having canned chicken soup for the 3rd night in a row. But I hadn't told them. I hadn't found the words to explain that it hurts to see your money invested in the happiness of others while you count pennies to buy aspirin. I closed the door softly and lay down on the bed, burying my face in the pillow that still smelled of the classic cologne Arthur used. That scent was my refuge, my last piece of a time when someone saw me as more than an obligation or a source of income. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to walk. Jefferson University Hospital was 40 minutes away on foot from my house, but I had all afternoon free. What for? To continue being invisible in my own living room, to listen to them planning the weekend without including me, to watch them spend my money on things they never asked me if I needed. I walked slowly down Broad Street, feeling how my old leather shoes molded to the uneven pavement. They were the same shoes I had worn to accompany Arthur to his chemo treatments. The same ones I had worn out going back and forth to the hospital during his last 6 months of life. The left sole had a small hole that let the cold in every winter, but it was a luxury I couldn't afford to repair. While waiting for the light to change at the intersection with South Street, a notification popped up on my phone. My heart raced, hoping it was David asking if I had made it to the doctor, if I needed anything, if I was okay. But no, it was an alert from the bank. Purchase approved for $140. Blooming Gardens Florist, Old City, PA. $140. Almost a third of my monthly pension. On flowers. I stopped dead on the sidewalk as people rushed past me with that characteristic hurry of the city center. A woman with grocery bags nudged me without apologizing. A street vendor offered me gum and loose cigarettes. The world kept turning while I crumbled inside. 140. ONFLOWERS. WHENWASTHELASTTIMESOMEONEBOUGHTGMEFLOWERS WHENWASTHELASTTIMEDAVID REMEMBEREDMYBIRTHDAYWITHOUTM EREMINDINGHIMT HREETIMES LASTAPRIL MYSIXTY FIFTHBIRTHDAY IHADPREPAREDAHUGE HOMEMADELASAGNA SINCEF IVEINT HEMORNING CHOPEPINGVEGETABLESUNTILMYARMSACHED INGTHIRTYDIFFERENTINGREDIENTSBEC AUSEITWASMYGRANDMOTHERANDIDIANDIWANTEGSPECIAL ITWASMYBIRTHDAYBUTIWASCOOKAYNGFORTHEMASALWAYS Each Elysia STRWEDUPFORTHEMEALWITHERNAILSFRESHLYDONE. 140 on flowers. When was the last time someone bought me flowers? When was the last time? David had remembered my birthday without me reminding him 3 times. Last April, my 65th birthday. I had prepared a home-made lasagna for since 5 in the morning, chopping vegetables until my arms ached. Layering 30 different ingredients because it was my grandmother's recipe and I wanted to do something special. It was my birthday, but I was cooking for them, as always. Chelsea showed up for the meal with her nails freshly done, 30 that I knew very well where they came from, and brought me a greeting card that still had the price tag, $4.00, a generic card that said, for a special person, without any personal dedication. David had arrived late, talking on the phone about deals that never materialized, and when he finally sat at the table, he only said, "The lasagna is good, Mom. Maybe a little too much garlic, though. A little too much garlic." After 5 hours of cooking, after spending $30 on ingredients, after it was my birthday. But now, as I walked toward the hospital, my card was paying $140 for flowers for someone else. I arrived at Dr. Stern's office 20 minutes late. The receptionist gave me that look of reproach she reserves for patients who don't keep schedules, but the doctor, an older man with gray hair and gentle hands, received me with the same patience he had shown Arthur. "Mrs. Davis, how have you been feeling since the last consultation?" The simplest question in the world became complicated. How had I been feeling? Invisible. Used. Tired of giving without receiving. Tired of loving people who saw me as a walking ATM. "I've been dizzy a lot, doctor, and I feel like my heart is going to jump out of my chest when I climb stairs. Have you had any particular stress lately?" Stress. As if living with 2 people who had turned my house into their personal kingdom wasn't stressful. As if discovering every 2 weeks that my money was evaporating into unauthorized expenses Wasn't cause for concern. A little doctor. Family matters. He examined me with the meticulousness of someone who had seen too many broken hearts, literally and figuratively. Blood pressure, high, heartbeat, irregular. EKG, worrying. Mrs. Davis, you need to reduce your stress urgently. Your heart is working too hard. Do you have any family members who can help you with household chores? Someone who can look after you a bit? The question sounded so absurd I almost laughed. Yes, doctor. I have a son who lives in my house, eats my food, spends my money, but leaves me without gas when I need to go to the doctor. I have a daughter-in-law who uses my cards as if they were hers but has never asked if I need anything. I have my son. I lied. He helps me. The doctor prescribed medications that cost $75. PILLSFORBLOODPRESSURE. PILLSFORTHETMYBODYNOLONGERPROCESSADNESSALSOMA KESORGANSSICKI ILEFTTHEPHARMACYWITHMYBAGSOFREMEDIESANDI 75 broad pills for blood pressure, pills for the heart, vitamins that my body no longer processed we all because adness also makes organ sick. I left the pharmacy with my bags of Fremedisa NAD 5 in my pocket. $5 to survive until the next deposit. Less than what Chelsea spent on a coffee at Starbucks. The walk back home was slower. Every block felt like a mile. Every step a declaration that I was still here, still resisting, still strong even if no one recognized it. When I arrived in the Passyunk Square area, I saw my Civic parked exactly where I had left it in the morning, but something had changed. The tank was no longer empty. Someone had put gas in it. For a moment, my heart leaped with hope. Maybe David had repented. Maybe he had remembered that his mother needed mobility to take care of her health. Maybe. But then I saw the note taped to the windshield, written in Chelsea's careless handwriting. Ma, we put gas in because we need the car early tomorrow. Don't move it from here. We'll be late. Ma. Not even Mrs. Davis or Eleanor. Ma. As if I were just that. A family appendage, an obligation, a piece of furniture to be tolerated because I came included in the marriage package. I walked into my house feeling the weight of the afternoon in every muscle. The living room was empty, but I could hear voices in the backyard. I peered through the kitchen window and saw them there. David, Chelsea, and the girls, sitting around the garden table that Arthur had built with his own hands. On the table, a huge arrangement of red and white roses. Beautiful, professional, expensive. The girls were laughing as Chelsea served them chocolate cake. A cake I hadn't made, hadn't seen arrive, that no one had offered me. Grandma Chelsea is the best, said Olivia, the elder, hugging Chelsea. She always brings us yummy treats. Grandma Chelsea, the woman who had paid for the flowers, with my card, was being called Grandma. Me, who had carried them in my arms since they were babies, who had sung them lullabies, who had taught them to walk in this very yard, they called Ma when they spoke to me. David raised his glass of imported craft soda, those expensive ones that cost $3.50 each, and proposed a toast to Grandma Chelsea, who always makes Sundays special. Sunday. It was Sunday, and I didn't know they were celebrating anything. It was Sunday, and no one had invited me to my own yard. I moved away from the window before they could see me. I went up to my bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed with the bags of medicine in my hands. 75. WORTHPILLSTOKEEPMEALIVE. 75 bites worth of pills to keep me live. 140 worth of flowers to celebrate another grandma. The math of lovelessness is always exact. That night, while they were still laughing in the backyard, I opened the drawer of my nightstand and took out an old ledger where Arthur used to note household expenses. The yellowed pages smelled of his cologne and the cigarettes he smoked in secret. I took a pen and began to write. Not a list of expenses, but a list of everything I had given. Everything I had sacrificed. Everything I had lost in the name of familial love. 15. 000. FORTHECOMPUS TERBUSINESSTHATFOLDED. IWROTESLOWLYFEELINGEVERYNUMBERLIKEAWOUND. 15,000. For the computer business, that folded. I wrote slowly, feeling every number like a wound. 3,500 for the down payment on David's car. 2 Warren FORDAVIDAND CHELSEASWEDDING. 2,000 for David and Chelsea's wedding. 1,000 for the honeymoon trip they never thanked me for. 4 800 INTU ITIONFORTHEGIRLSEPRIVATESCHOOL. 4,800 intuition for the girls' private school. 20,000 in food, utilities, house repairs over 2 years. The numbers accumulated on the page like dried tears. Over $45,000. Over $45,000 that I had invested in the happiness of others while I was left with the crumbs. $45,000 that could have given me a dignified old age, my own apartment, private medicine, trips that Arthur and I had dreamed of taking when we retired. But Arthur had died before retiring, and I had given our dreams away to a family that paid me with indifference. I closed the ledger and put it away with my heart pills. Tomorrow would be another day just like this. Another day of being invisible in my own life. Or maybe not. Maybe it was time for the invisible woman to start making herself seen. The first microaggression came Monday morning, disguised as family concern. "Mom, don't you think it's time you considered simplifying your life?" David asked me while eating the scrambled eggs and bacon I'd prepared since 6 in the morning. "Chelsea and I were talking, and we think this house is too big for one person." One person. As if he and his family were ghosts who didn't take up space, didn't generate expenses, didn't consume electricity, water, gas, or food. As if the 2 years they had been living here were an illusion of mine. "I'm not alone," I replied while pouring him more coffee in the chipped mug. "You all are here." Chelsea looked up from her phone for the first time in the conversation, with that smile I had learned to recognize. The smile she used when she was about to say something that would hurt me, but that she would mask as common sense. "Oh, Eleanor, but we're not going to be here forever. David is already looking at business opportunities in Texas, and the girls need their space. You know how restless kids can be." Restless. The girls who ran through my house, who drew on my walls, who had broken 3 plates from the good china Arthur had given me on our 10th anniversary. But when I suggested a little order, Chelsea would reply that kids need freedom to develop their creativity. "Besides," David continued, breaking a piece of toast with that studied delicacy he used when he wanted to sound reasonable, "maintaining this house must be super expensive for you. The property tax, the electricity, the water, the gas. With your pension, my pension." They always came back to my pension, as if it were alms and not the result of 30 years of working dawn to dusk as a seamstress, paying my taxes religiously, sustaining a family when Arthur lost his job during the recession. "The house is paid for," I said with the firmest voice I could muster, "and I don't struggle to maintain it." "Of course not, Mom," David said with that condescending patience he reserved for explaining things I supposedly didn't understand. "But think about it. You could sell, invest the money, live more quietly in a small apartment, without stairs to tire you out, without so much to clean. Without so much to clean. As if cleaning my own house were a burden and not a way to stay active, to feel useful, to preserve the spaces where every corner held a memory of Arthur. "And where would you all live?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Well," Chelsea settled into the chair, the same chair my mother sat in when she visited us on Sundays, "we could stay here until we find something. As caretakers, you know? So you don't feel lonely while you look for an apartment." Caretakers. Them taking care of me. Them who left me without gas to go to the doctor. Them who spent my money without consulting me. Them who treated me like an uncomfortable guest in my own house. The conversation dragged on for another half hour, with the same apparently solicitous tone, the same vocabulary of false concern. When they finally left, David to explore investment opportunities, and Chelsea to see a friend, both with my debit card, of course, I was left alone with the dirty dishes and a feeling of nausea that had nothing to do with my medications. I sat in the living room and looked around my house. The house where I had raised David, where I had cared for Arthur during his illness, where I had cried their deaths and celebrated their lives. Every piece of furniture, every photograph, every stain on the rug told a story. How could they suggest I get rid of all that as if it were old junk? The phone rang at 11. It was the girls' school. Mrs. Davis, this is the principal of St. Michael's Academy. The girls haven't been here in 3 days, and we haven't received a doctor's note. Is everything all right at home? 3 days. The girls had left every morning with their uniforms ironed, with the lunch I prepared for them, with the few dollars for the bus fare that I gave them religiously, but they hadn't gone to school. That must be a mistake, I said, feeling my heart accelerate. I've seen them leave every day. Ma'am, I'm looking at the register. Olivia and Madison haven't attended since last Thursday, and they also haven't caught up on tuition. We're 2 months behind. 2 months behind. 2 months of tuition that I had been paying religiously, transferring $400 each month from my account. Money that clearly hadn't reached the school. I hung up the phone with trembling hands. I checked my ledger, the one where I tracked every dollar that left my pension. There they were. All the transfers to David marked as girls' tuition, $800 in 2 months that had evaporated. When they arrived at lunchtime, the girls came with bags of candy and cheap toys. They had been at the flea market, at the park, at friends' houses whose parents didn't work. Anywhere but school. How was school? I asked them as I watched them dump their backpacks on the sofa. Good, Grandma, replied Olivia without looking me in the eyes. We did math. A lie. A lie so obvious that it hurt my soul. Not because the girls were lying to me, but because someone had taught them to lie to me. Someone had told them it was normal to skip class, normal to deceive the grandma who paid for their education. That afternoon, while David and Chelsea were in the backyard speaking in low voices, conversations that always ceased when I appeared, I decided to check the bank statements that arrived in my name, but that they always picked up from the mailbox before me. I found them in David's room, inside a shoebox along with invoices I didn't recognize and receipts from stores where I had never shopped. My bank account, my money, my financial life reduced to papers hidden in my son's room. What I discovered took the air out of my lungs. Not only had they used my money to pay for tuition that never reached the school, there were also transfers that I had not authorized. 500 TOABITCOININVESTMENTACCOUNT, $500 to a Bitcoin investment account, $300 to an online food delivery business, $800 to an online clothing store. My full pension for 3 months had become financial experiments that I knew nothing about. Cryptocurrency investments that could disappear overnight, phantom businesses that promised to multiply capital in weeks, expenses on clothing I had never seen anyone in my house wear. Further down the pile of papers, I found something that chilled my blood. A quote for a retirement home. The Meadows Assisted Living, Comprehensive Care for Seniors, monthly cost, $5,800. $5,800. Almost 3 times my monthly pension. An amount that could only be paid by selling my house. My house. On the back of the quote, in Chelsea's handwriting, there was a note. Cheaper option than caring for her ourselves. With the house sale, we could pay 5 years in advance and have cash left over for the Texas business. Cash for the business. Me converted into an investment that had to be liquidated to generate capital. My old age, my health, my dignity reduced to an asset that had to be turned into money for my son's entrepreneurial projects. I sat on the floor of the room, surrounded by papers that documented the most systematic betrayal I had experienced in my 65 years. It hadn't been an impulse, a mistake, a moment of desperation. It had been a plan, calculated, meticulous, executed for months while I cooked for them, washed their clothes, cared for their daughters. The sound of their laughter came from the backyard. David was telling some anecdote, and Chelsea laughed with that musical laugh she used when she wanted to show she was a fun, accommodating wife. The girls asked for more soda, more cake, more attention. A perfect family enjoying a perfect afternoon with money they had stolen from the woman who fed them. I got up from the floor and put all the papers in my purse. I wasn't going to confront them yet, not with the blind fury I felt at that moment. First, I needed to think, plan, understand exactly how much damage they had done, and how I could protect the little I had left. I went down to the kitchen and started preparing dinner, like every night. But this time, as I peeled potatoes and chopped onions, I wasn't the selfless grandmother who cooked out of love. I was a woman who had just discovered she had been made a victim of her own kindness, and who was no longer willing to continue being a victim. Tears fell onto the onions, mixing with the natural sting that made me cry. But for the first time in months, not all my tears were of sadness. Some were of rage. And rage, I discovered that night, could be the first step toward freedom. I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake until 3 in the morning, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of chamomile tea cooling between my hands, looking at the papers spread out on the table like evidence of a crime that I myself had been financing unknowingly. At 6 in the morning, when David came down for his morning coffee, I was already dressed and waiting for him. "Son, we need to talk." I placed the bank statements on the table, one by one, like cards in a game where I had just discovered I had been losing from the start. His eyes moved nervously over the papers, calculating explanations, measuring how much he could deny and how much he would have to admit. "Mom, I can explain. $5,800 for a geriatric residence," I interrupted him, holding the quote. "When were you planning to tell me?" His face went through 3 different expressions in 5 seconds. Surprise, guilt, and finally, irritation, as if I were the one doing something wrong by discovering his betrayal. "It's not what it looks like, Mom. Chelsea was just researching options in case you ever, in case you need more care than we can give you." "Care?" The word came out of my mouth like venom. "What care do you give me? Leaving me without gas to go to the doctor? Using my money to buy flowers for another family?" Chelsea appeared in the kitchen at that moment, wrapped in the bathrobe that had been mine until she decided it looked better on her. Her perfect hair and makeup already applied at 6:30 in the morning reminded me of all the money she spent at the salon every week. "What's going on here?" she asked with that sweet voice she used when she needed to manipulate a situation. "Your mother-in-law found some papers," David said, as if I were a child rummaging through drawers where I shouldn't be. "Papers from my bank account that you were hiding in your room," I clarified, pointing directly at Chelsea. "Papers that show how you've been stealing from me for months." "Stealing?" Chelsea put her hand to her chest in a theatrical gesture. "How can you say that? Everything we've done has been for this family, for your granddaughters. My granddaughters who haven't been to school in a week while I pay tuition that you divert to your Bitcoin schemes." The word Bitcoins dropped onto the kitchen like a bomb. Chelsea looked at David with those eyes that communicated more than any conversation, and in that exchange of glances, I saw the confirmation of everything I already knew. This had been planned. It wasn't negligence. It wasn't desperation. It was a systematic theft executed by my own family. "Mom, those cryptocurrency investments are to secure the girl's future," David said, adopting that professional tone he used when he wanted to sound like he understood finance. "The traditional market isn't enough anymore. We need to diversify the family assets." Family assets. My assets converted into our assets by unilateral decree. "And the girls skipping class is also to secure their future?" "The girls are fine." Chelsea sat down at the table with that studied elegance she had perfected for occasions when she needed to lie convincingly. "Sometimes they need days off. The traditional education system is too rigid. We prefer a more holistic education." Holistic. Another elegant word to cover up negligence. As if letting the girls wander the flea market while I paid private school tuition was a progressive educational philosophy. "Besides," Chelsea continued, taking my hand with that false familiarity that turned my stomach, "you yourself have said you want the best for the girls. We're just investing your money more intelligently." Investing my money more intelligently. As if my 65 years of experience were worth less than the YouTube videos where David had learned about cryptocurrencies. The girls came downstairs at that moment, rubbing their eyes and looking for the breakfast I always had ready. Olivia approached to say good morning, but Chelsea stopped her. "Girls, go get dressed. We're going out for breakfast today." "But I want Grandma Chelsea to make me pancakes," protested Madison. Grandma Chelsea. Not even at that moment could they call me just Grandma. It had to be Grandma Chelsea to distinguish me from the other grandma, the one who received expensive flowers and celebrations at restaurants. Not today, sweetheart. Grandma Chelsea is busy with grown-up things. Grown-up things. As if discovering you've been stolen from was a hobby for old people, and not a crisis that they had created. They took the girls with that suspicious hurry of those who need to leave before the situation complicates further. I heard them whispering in the hallway, planning their day away from the house, away from me, away from the consequences of what they had done. I was left alone in the kitchen with the papers still spread out on the table and a feeling of emptiness that had nothing to do with hunger. For 2 hours, I ordered and reordered the documents, trying to understand the magnitude of the damage. It wasn't just the stolen money. It was the destroyed trust, the certainty that the people I loved most in the world saw me as an exploitable resource. At 10 in the morning, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor forever, with a plate of homemade apple pie. "I came to keep you company a while, Eleanor. You've looked very thoughtful lately." Mrs. Thompson was 70 years old and had the wisdom of someone who had raised 6 children alone after her husband abandoned them. She sat at my table, poured coffee for both of us, and waited with that infinite patience that only women who have survived family betrayals possess. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" I showed her the papers. All of them. Without editing them, without softening the details, without protecting David's image as I had done for so many years when people asked why my 38-year-old son didn't have his own home. Mrs. Thompson examined every document with the attention of an auditor. Occasionally, she made small sounds of disapproval, but she didn't interrupt me until I finished explaining everything. "Oh, Eleanor," she finally said, taking off her glasses to clean them. "Do you know what hurts me most about all this?" "What?" "That it doesn't surprise me." Her words hurt me more than all the betrayals of David and Chelsea put together. Had my situation been so obvious that even the neighbors had noticed before me? "I've seen you walking to the market instead of using your car for months. I haven't seen you buy the good meat you always bought for months. For months you've had that look of someone carrying a weight that doesn't belong to them. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because one doesn't interfere in other people's family problems. But also because I thought you already knew and had decided to allow it." Allow it. As if I had consciously chosen to be a victim of financial and emotional abuse. As if I had woken up one day and decided that my old age would be a forced donation to the well-being of people who repaid me with contempt. "What would you do in my place, Hope?" "Me," she said, taking a sip of coffee and looking me directly in the eyes. "I already did it 30 years ago when my eldest son tried to take over his dead father's house. Do you know what I did?" I shook my head. "I kicked him out. Him and his wife. I told them that when they learned to respect their mother, they could come back. My son left angry, calling me a bitter old woman, saying I would regret it, that I would be alone forever." "And did you regret it?" "Never. That son came back 2 years later, without the wife who had filled his head with strange ideas, asking for forgiveness and offering real help. The other 5 never dared to disrespect me because they saw what happened when that line was crossed." Mrs. Thompson finished her coffee and got up to leave. Before going out, she placed her wrinkled hand over mine. "Eleanor, you don't have to buy your family's love. If they truly love you, they will love you even if you have no money to give them. If they don't truly love you, it's better to know now while you can still do something about it." When she left, I stayed in the kitchen thinking about her words. Had I been buying love all these years? Was that what I was doing every time I paid for something that wasn't my responsibility? Every time I gave money without it being returned? Every time I cooked for people who didn't thank me? They returned at 6 in the evening. David, Chelsea, and the girls arrived carrying bags from an expensive mall, laughing about some adventure they had experienced while I stayed home processing their betrayal. "Grandma Chelsea!" shouted Olivia when she saw me. "Look what Dad bought me!" It was an expensive doll, one of those that cost over $50. Olivia hugged it with that genuine happiness of children who don't understand where the money comes from or how much it costs to earn it. $50 on a doll. While I was drinking tea instead of eating dinner to save money for their tuition. "Where did you get the money to go shopping?" I asked with a calmness that surprised me. "David had an extra income," Chelsea quickly replied. A client who paid him for a systems consultation. A lie. David hadn't had a real job in 2 years. The only income entering that house was my pension, and they knew it as well as I did. That night, after they went to bed, I made a decision. The next day, I would go to the bank to change all the passwords for my accounts. It was time for my resources to truly be mine. The Wells Fargo branch on Broad Street opened its doors at 8 in the morning, and I was already waiting on the sidewalk since 7:30. I had left the house without saying goodbye, without warning, without leaving breakfast prepared for the first time in 2 years. Freedom, I discovered, started with small rebellions. The executive who assisted me was named Sarah Jenkins, a woman in her 40s who reviewed my documents with the efficiency of someone who had seen too many similar stories. When I explained that I needed to change all the access codes because other people had been using my accounts without authorization, she showed no surprise. "Do you also wish to cancel the additional cards registered?" she asked, looking at her computer screen. Additional cards. Of course, there were additional cards. David and Chelsea had full access to my money with plastic that I had never formally authorized. Yes, cancel everything that is not solely in my name. In 30 minutes, the entire financial structure that had allowed the systematic looting of my assets was dismantled. New passwords, a new debit card that would arrive in 5 days, cancellation of automatic transfers, total blockage of third-party access. Mrs. Davis, Sarah told me before I left. It's important that you know your account shows very high activity for the amount of income you receive. We have detected patterns suggesting unauthorized use over the last 8 months. 8 months. Longer than I had calculated. The theft had begun long before my health started failing. Long before I needed more care. From the beginning, they had seen me as an exploitable source of income. Can I recover that money in any way? You can file a report for misuse of bank cards. We have records of all transactions, but you must be aware that if the people who used your cards live in your household, the legal process will be complicated. Complicated. An elegant word for saying that suing your own family for theft was possible, but painful, long and publicly humiliating. I left the bank with a strange feeling in my chest. It wasn't happiness, but it wasn't the constant sadness I had carried for months either. It was something close to relief. Like taking off shoes that have been pinching all day and finally being able to breathe. I decided to walk through the historic center instead of taking the bus back. It had been years since I'd indulged in the luxury of wandering aimlessly, of stopping at food stands without calculating how much each bite cost, of going into stores just to look without the pressure of buying something useful for the house. At the City Hall Plaza, I sat on a bench and watched the families strolling, grandparents carrying grandchildren, parents pushing strollers, teenagers sharing pretzels with mustard. Normal life. Normal families where love wasn't paid for with bank transfers. My phone rang at 11:30. It was David. "Mom, where are you?" "Chelsea went to the grocery store and the card isn't working." "I'm fine, son. I went out to run some errands." "What errands? And why isn't the card working?" His voice had that impatience he used when something interrupted his plans. He wasn't asking about my well-being, whether I had made it downtown okay or if I needed anything. He just wanted to know why his access to my money had been interrupted. I changed the bank passwords. "You won't be able to use my cards anymore." Silence. A long silence that filled the entire plaza. "What? Why did you do that?" "Because it's my money, David. And until you learn to respect me, you won't have access to it." "Mom, you can't do that. We have expenses. The girls need things. Chelsea had already planned the week's shopping. The girls need to go to school. That's what they need. Not expensive toys bought with stolen money." "Don't use that word. We haven't stolen anything. We're family." Family. The word they had used as justification for everything. Family to take my money without asking. Family to hide bank statements. Family to plan to institutionalize me in a retirement home. But never family to ask me how I felt or if I needed company at my doctor's appointments. "When you act like family, we'll talk," I said, and hung up the phone. My hands trembled after hanging up, but it wasn't the tremor of fear. It was the adrenaline of someone who had just jumped off a cliff and discovered she could fly. I ate lunch alone at a small diner near the Liberty Bell. I ordered a cup of soup and iced tea. A simple meal I didn't have to share with anyone, didn't have to justify as a household expense. For the first time in months, every spoonful tasted like freedom. The waiter was a young man in his 20s who treated me with the genuine courtesy given to customers who pay their own bill, not with the condescending patience they used with me at home. When he asked if everything was all right, he genuinely wanted to know the answer. Yes, I said, surprised at how true it sounded. Everything is very much all right. I returned home at 3 in the afternoon. Silence greeted me at the door. No voices in the backyard. No television in the living room. No noise from girls playing. The house was empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt mine. I found a note on the kitchen table, written in Chelsea's urgent hand. Ma, we went to my mom's place until you get over your fit. The girls can't be in a stressful environment. When you are ready to act like a normal grandma, you can find us. Act like a normal grandma. According to Chelsea, a normal grandma was someone who allowed herself to be stolen from without protesting, who financed the lives of others without receiving either gratitude or respect in return. I crumpled the note and threw it in the trash. Then I made myself a cup of cinnamon tea and sat in my living room, to enjoy the silence that was no longer synonymous with loneliness. At 6 in the evening, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Thompson with a plate of homemade apple pie and a smile that knew my secrets. How did the bank go? Good. Very good. I canceled all their access to my accounts. And how do you feel? The question caught me by surprise. It had been so long since anyone asked me how I felt that I didn't know how to answer honestly. Free, I finally said. For the first time in years, I feel free. Mrs. Thompson served the pie on my plates, not the disposable ones that Chelsea always demanded when we ate takeout. We dined in my dining room, using my good china, talking about things that had nothing to do with money or family responsibilities. She told me about her youngest son, who visited her every Sunday and took her to the farmer's market. She told me about her granddaughter who was studying medicine and always showed off her grades. She described a life where family love didn't cost money, where adult children treated their mothers as people worthy of respect, instead of as exploitable resources. Do you think I did the right thing? I asked her while we washed the dishes together. Child, you don't have to ask me if you did the right thing by protecting your own money in your own house. The question is, why it took you so long. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. I didn't wake up at 3 in the morning worrying about accounts that didn't add up. I had no nightmares about retirement homes or cryptocurrency investments that could disappear overnight. I woke up at 8 in the morning, when my body wanted to wake up, not when the noise of others forced me to get up. I prepared coffee just for myself, scrambled eggs in the exact amount I wanted to eat, toast without having to calculate if there would be enough left for others. Breakfast tasted like Sunday, even though it was Wednesday. My phone showed 12 missed calls from David and 8 text messages that I didn't open. Instead of answering, I dialed the number for St. Michael's Academy. Good morning. This is Eleanor Davis, grandmother of Olivia and Madison Davis. Could you tell me exactly how much tuition we owe? Mrs. Davis, we are 3 months behind. The total amount due is $1,200. Perfect. I'm coming this afternoon to settle the full balance. But I need to ensure that from now on, only I can authorize payments and changes to the girl's account. Of course, ma'am. We just need you to come in with identification and proof that you are the financially responsible party. Financially responsible party, a title I had always held but had never fully exercised. It was time to change that. That afternoon, as I walked toward the school with the $1,200 cash in my purse, I realized I wasn't walking like a victim going to pay the consequences of others' mistakes. I was walking like a woman who had decided to take control of her own life, and that, I discovered, changed even the way the echo of my steps sounded on the sidewalk. David arrived home at 7 on Thursday evening, after 3 days of silence. He didn't come alone. Chelsea walked behind him with that victim posture she had perfected for difficult occasions, and the girls moved nervously, as if they had been instructed on what to say and do. I was in the kitchen preparing quesadillas for dinner, just for myself, when I heard the door open. For 3 days I had cooked individual portions, bought only what I consumed, and lived in my house as if it were truly mine. The contrast with previous years was so dramatic that I found it hard to believe I had tolerated that invasion of my space and tranquility for so long. "Mom, we need to talk," David announced with that solemn voice he used when he wanted to seem like the responsible adult of the family. "Hello, son. How are the girls?" He didn't answer my question. Instead, he sat at the kitchen table as if he owned the house, and I was the one who needed to give explanations. "Are you over your fit yet? Because this can't keep going on." Fit. Unnecessary drama. 3 days of peace. 3 days of managing my own money. 3 days of sleeping without worries, and he called it a fit. It wasn't a fit, David. It was a decision, and I still think it was the right one. Chelsea then approached with the girls in tow, and adopted that expression of the misunderstood martyr she knew affected me. "Eleanor, the girls have been asking about you. They've been so sad. They don't understand why their grandmother abandoned them." The girls looked at me with those big eyes that Chelsea had trained to generate guilt, but I could see past the manipulation. I could see 2 little ones who had been used as emotional weapons in a war they hadn't chosen. "Hello, my loves," I said, bending down to their level. "How have you been?" "Grandma Chelsea, Mom says you don't love us anymore because we're too naughty," Olivia said with that devastating honesty of children. Chelsea squeezed her hand to make her quiet, but it was too late. The strategy had been exposed. They had used the girls as emotional hostages, filling them with guilt and confusion to pressure me into giving in. "I love you both very much," I told them, looking directly at Chelsea as I spoke. "But sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions to protect the family. And part of protecting you is making sure you have what you really need, like going to school every day." "Mom says school is boring," Madison mumbled. "Well, sometimes important things are a little boring. But that's where you learn to read better, do math, and make friends your age." David interrupted the conversation with that impatience he showed every time someone else had the attention he thought he deserved. "All right. You've talked. Now we need to resolve this like adults. Mom, you can't just cut off access to the family accounts like that. They're not family accounts. They're my accounts, with my money. Technically, yes, but there is no technically, David. It's my pension. It's my house. They are my decisions." Chelsea then sat down and adopted that negotiator pose I had seen used in soap operas. "Look, Eleanor, we understand you're upset. Maybe we weren't clear enough with our financial plans, but everything we've done has been with everyone's well-being in mind. Your well-being, too." "My well-being?" Did my well-being include the geriatric residents they were quoting? The silence that followed was so thick that I could hear the ticking of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the nervous breathing of the girls who didn't understand why the adults were speaking in such strained voices. Chelsea looked at David for support, but he was busy examining his fingernails as if they had developed fascinating properties in the last few seconds. That was just a preventative inquiry," Chelsea finally said, "in case you ever needed specialized care that we couldn't provide." "What care have you provided so far? Leaving me without gas to go to the doctor? Hiding my bank statements? Lying to me about the girls' tuition?" "Enough!" David exploded, slamming his palm on the table. "You're my mother, not my boss. You have no right to control everything as if we were employees." The phrase hung in the air like toxic smoke. For 38 years, I had been his mother. I had fed him, clothed him, educated him, loved him unconditionally. But in his mind, I was the employee who had stepped out of line, who had forgotten her place in the family hierarchy. "You're right," I said with a surprising calm. "I am your mother, not your boss. But I am not your employee either. I am not your personal bank. I am not your servant or your guaranteed source of income." "Mom, don't exaggerate." "I'm not exaggerating. I'm setting boundaries that I should have set a long time ago." I got up from the table and went to the drawer where I kept all the important house papers. I pulled out a folder I had prepared that morning. Copies of all the bank statements, all the unauthorized transfers, all the expenses they had made with my money over the last 8 months. "Look at this," I said, spreading the papers on the table. "Here is a record of every time you used my money without asking me. Every purchase, every transfer, every loan you never repaid." Chelsea tried to grab the papers, but I placed my hand over them. "They are copies. The originals are in a safe place. And I also have copies of the geriatric residence quote with your note on the back, Chelsea. The one where you calculate that by selling my house you can pay 5 years in advance and have cash left over for your Texas business. Chelsea's face turned the color of burnt toast. David looked at her as if seeing her for the first time, as if he hadn't known the complete plan until that moment. Chelsea, what is Mom talking about? It was just an idea, honey. A contingency in case. In case what? In case you decided you didn't want me cluttering up my own home anymore? The girls started crying. All that noise, all that tension had scared them, and instead of protecting them from the conflict, we adults had put them right in the middle of it. I approached them and hugged them. My loves, why don't you go watch TV in the living room while the adults finish talking? Olivia looked at me with those wise eyes that children sometimes have. Grandma Chelsea, are we not going to live here anymore? The question went straight to the heart of everything. It wasn't a child asking about stability. It was a child who had overheard enough whispered conversations between her parents to understand that their situation was precarious. I don't know yet, sweetie. That depends on whether your parents are willing to follow some basic rules of respect. When the girls left the kitchen, the silence returned, but it was different. It was the silence of people who knew they had reached a point of no return. These are my conditions, I said, remaining standing, maintaining the position of authority due to me as the homeowner. First, my finances are mine alone. No more access to my accounts. No more unauthorized loans. No more expenses in my name without my explicit permission. But Mom, second, the girls go to school every day. I will pay the tuition directly to the school. You do not touch that money for anything else. You're being irrational. Third, this house has basic rules of living together. Schedules are respected, household chores are contributed to, and I am treated with the courtesy I deserve as the owner and as an older person. And Chelsea got up from the chair with that theatrical indignation she reserved for moments when she didn't get what she wanted. You know what? We don't need this. We can go live with my mother until we find our own place. Perfect, I replied without hesitation. When you are ready to live with respect and honesty, you can return. Otherwise, I hope you will be very happy somewhere else. David looked at me as if he didn't recognize me. For 38 years, I had been the mother who conceded, who forgave, who put the needs of others before her own. He didn't know how to relate to a woman who defended herself. Are you seriously kicking us out? I'm not kicking you out. I'm giving you options. You can stay if you agree to treat me like a human being who deserves respect, or you can leave if you prefer to continue with your plan to exploit me until I die, or you lock me up in a residence. The bluntness of my words seemed to shock them. Chelsea put her hand to her chest in that dramatic gesture she used when she wanted to appear hurt, but David just stood there, calculating, measuring how much he could lose if the situation spun completely out of control. Give me time to think about it, he finally said. You have until Sunday, I replied. 3 days to decide if you want to be my family or my exploiters. That night, they went back to Chelsea's mother's house. The difference was that this time, when I closed the door behind them, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relief, and for the first time in years, that feeling didn't scare me. On Saturday morning, I woke up without an alarm at 9, a time I hadn't seen since my youth. The house was silent, but it was a silence full of possibilities instead of the tense silence that had characterized the last few years. I stayed in bed a few more minutes, simply because I could. Simply because no one was waiting for me to make breakfast or wash uniforms or solve crises that others had created. When I finally got up, I indulged in a long hot shower, without calculating the cost of the gas or whether someone else would need to use the bathroom. I put on a blue blouse I had bought months ago, but had never worn because Chelsea had commented that color makes you look older. Today, in the mirror, I realized that the blue matched my eyes and gave me an elegant air that I had forgotten I possessed. I had coffee with a touch of cinnamon and a cinnamon roll that I liked, sitting at my dining table, reading the entire newspaper for the first time in years. World news seemed less overwhelming when I didn't have to simultaneously worry about how much money they had spent in my absence, or what new lie I would have to uncover in my bank statements. At 11, the doorbell rang. It was a young man on a scooter with a bouquet of yellow flowers. Eleanor Davis? Yes, that's me. Special delivery. I need your signature here. The flowers came with a small card. To the bravest woman I know. With love, Hope. I stood at the door, holding the first bouquet of flowers someone had sent me in over 5 years. They weren't flowers bought with stolen money to celebrate someone else. They were flowers for me. Because someone had thought of me. Because someone had recognized something good in my recent decisions. I put the flowers in the crystal vase that had been my mother's, the same one Chelsea had always criticized as old-fashioned. Today it looked perfect in the center of my table, adding color and life to a space that had regained its warmth. At noon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. Go out aimlessly, with no errands list, with no specific purpose other than the pleasure of walking through my own city. I took the subway to Old City, a place Arthur and I had visited when we were dating but had never returned to because there was always something more urgent, more important, more necessary to attend to. The Old City market was full of colors, smells, and sounds that awakened memories I didn't know were still alive. I bought a loaded Philly pretzel with spicy seasoning and a hint of lemon, not because it was nutritious or economical, but because it looked delicious and I felt like eating it. I sat on a bench in the square to observe the families strolling, and for the first time in years, I didn't envy their apparent happiness. In a craft store, I found a silver bracelet with small turquoise stones. It cost $25, money I would have previously considered an unjustifiable luxury. But today I tried it on. I liked how it looked on my wrist, and I bought it without feeling guilty. It was my money, earned with my work, and I had the right to spend it on something that made me feel pretty. The seller was a Native American artisan in his 50s who explained that turquoise was a symbol of protection and renewal. "It's perfect for you, ma'am. You look like you're starting a new phase." Did it show that much? Was it so evident that something fundamental had changed in the way I walked, spoke, and occupied space in the world? I returned home at 5 in the afternoon, tired but satisfied in a way I had forgotten existed. The good kind of tired. The exhaustion of having chosen every activity, every expense, every moment of the day according to my own desires, instead of the needs of others. I found 2 messages on my phone. One was from David. "Mom, we want to talk to you tomorrow. Please don't make any drastic decisions before we have a chance to talk." The other was from a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Davis, this is Sarah from Wells Fargo. I just wanted to confirm that your new cards have arrived, and you can pick them up at your convenience. We also have some investment options that might interest you, considering you now have better control of your finances." Investments. For the first time in my life, someone was talking to me about investments as if I were a person capable of making intelligent financial decisions, not as an elderly woman who needed others to manage her money. That night, I cooked only for myself: a salmon fillet with vegetables, white rice, lemonade with mint. A balanced dinner that no one criticized for being too simple or too rich. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, accompanied only by classic jazz that I put on the radio without having to negotiate with anyone about the volume or the genre. After dinner, I sat in the backyard with a cup of chamomile tea and looked at the peach trees Arthur had planted. In the darkness, with only the kitchen light filtering through the windows, the yard looked different. Bigger, more mine, more filled with possibilities than with painful memories. I thought about calling my cousin Helen, who lived in Boston and with whom I had lost touch when life became so complicated that I didn't have the energy to maintain non-obligatory relationships. Helen had always been fun, independent, a woman who had raised 3 children alone and had turned her small catering business into a thriving company. I dialed her number before losing my nerve. "Eleanor, my God, how are you? It's been ages since we talked." Her warm voice came through the phone line like a hug. I told her everything. Not an edited version, not an explanation that protected David's image, but the complete truth about the last few years, about the financial abuse, about my recent awakening. Helen listened without interrupting, making small sounds of understanding and occasional exclamations of indignation when the betrayals became particularly cruel. "Cousin," she said when I finished, "I applaud you. You wouldn't believe how many women our age get trapped in those situations because they think it's their duty to sacrifice themselves for children who are already adults. Do you think I did the right thing? Absolutely. And I'll tell you something else. My eldest son tried to pull the same thing on me 10 years ago. He wanted me to lend him money for a business that was obviously a scam. When I said no, he got so angry he didn't speak to me for 6 months. And what happened? He came back. He apologized. Now he visits me every 2 weeks, brings me groceries, takes me to the doctor when I need it, and has never asked me for money again. Sons need boundaries, Eleanor. It doesn't matter that they're 30 years old. We talked for 2 hours. Helen told me about her grandchildren, about her recent trips to Miami and San Diego, about the freedom she had discovered after her children truly became independent. She invited me to visit her in Boston and suggested we take a trip to New England together that we had planned 20 years ago, but never materialized. You know what? She said, before hanging up. Tomorrow, I'm going to send one of my employees over with some authentic Boston cream pie, so you can celebrate your independence with something special. When I hung up the phone, I realized that I had spent 2 hours talking about things that had nothing to do with problems, money, or suffocating family responsibilities. We had talked about plans, dreams, and future possibilities. When was the last time I had had a conversation like that? On Sunday morning, I woke up early, not out of obligation, but out of excitement. I had a plan. I went to the Italian market, the one where they sold specialty ingredients I had always wanted to try, but considered too expensive for the family budget. I bought imported cheeses, prosciutto, stuffed olives, artisan bread, and Italian white wine. It wasn't food for a family. It was food for a woman who had decided to treat herself. I prepared an elegant table in the dining room, with my good china, my crystal glasses, Hope's yellow flowers as a centerpiece. At noon, sharp, David, Chelsea, and the girls arrived. I greeted them wearing my best dress, the turquoise bracelet gleaming on my wrist, my hair freshly styled at the salon I had visited that morning for the first time in 2 years. "Mom," David said, stopping in the doorway, "you look different." "I feel different," I replied. "Would you like to come in? I have something special prepared." I seated them at my dining table as if they were guests, not the owners of the place they had pretended to be. I served the wine, sliced the cheese, offered the prosciutto with the elegance of someone who had remembered how to be a hostess in her own home. Chelsea looked at the table with an expression of surprise she couldn't hide. "Eleanor, what are we celebrating?" "My new life," I replied, raising my glass. "And the opportunity I'm giving you to be part of it, if you are willing to respect the rules I establish in my own house." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was expectant. And for the first time in years, I was the one controlling what came next. 6 months after that afternoon when I served them Italian wine at my elegant table, my life had taken a shape I couldn't have imagined in my darkest moments. It was March, and the peach trees Arthur had planted were blooming with an abundance I hadn't seen in years, as if they, too, had regained the freedom to grow without restrictions. David and Chelsea had returned home that Sunday afternoon, after tasting the prosciutto and hearing my final conditions. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation full of tears and hugs. It was a negotiation between adults, a cohabitation contract where each party knew exactly what their rights and responsibilities were. David got a job at a computer systems company in Center City, a real job with fixed hours and a verifiable salary. Chelsea stopped using my cards and began contributing to household expenses by selling homemade desserts she prepared in my kitchen, but paying me a symbolic rent for the use of the space. The girls returned to school religiously, and their grades improved notably when education ceased to be optional. The most notable difference wasn't in what they did, but in how they treated me. I was no longer the invisible grandmother who cooked and paid bills. I was Eleanor, the homeowner, the woman who made financial decisions, the matriarch who had set clear boundaries and enforced them. Chelsea, my daughter-in-law, had to learn to ask me for things instead of taking them without asking. At first, she did it with that poorly disguised reluctance of someone who isn't used to asking permission, but gradually she developed something akin to genuine respect when she realized that I was more generous when consulted than when stolen from. The girls were the quickest to adapt to the new order. Children have a natural capacity to accept justice when they see it, and they soon understood that the new version of their Grandma Eleanor was happier, more willing to play with them, more emotionally present, because she was no longer consumed by resentment and constant worry. Olivia, now 10 years old, helped me care for the garden on Saturday mornings. As we planted new roses where plants had previously died from neglect, she asked me something that made me reflect for weeks. "Grandma Eleanor, why did you always look sad before? And now you look younger." How to explain to a child that for years I had been living a life that wasn't mine, carrying responsibilities that weren't mine, giving love that wasn't valued. How to tell her that I had needed to reach the limit of my strength to remember who I was before becoming solely what others needed me to be. "Sometimes adults forget to take care of themselves," I told her as we planted a yellow rose. "And when we don't take care of ourselves, we become like plants that don't get enough water. We wilt inside." "And did you remember to take care of yourself?" "Yes, my love." I remembered. The deepest transformation had occurred in my relationship with money and independence. With Sarah's advice from the bank, I had invested part of my savings in a conservative investment fund that gave me modest but stable monthly returns. For the first time in my life, my money was working for me instead of simply disappearing into the needs of others. I had also started taking computer classes at the local community center. At 65, learning to use the internet had opened up a world I didn't know existed. I could check my bank accounts from home, compare prices before buying, even video chat with Helen in Boston every Sunday afternoon. My cousin and I had taken that trip to New England we planned for decades. 5 days in a gorgeous colonial city, eating authentic seafood, buying antiques in the markets, walking on cobblestone streets without rush and without the pressure of returning home to solve other people's crises. It was the first trip I had taken for pleasure since my honeymoon with Arthur, 27 years ago. In New England, I met Dolores, a 70-year-old woman who sold handmade quilts at a craft fair. She told me that she had started her business at 60, after her children became independent, and she realized she didn't know who she was without the role of mother that had defined her for decades. "Freedom is scary at first," she told me, while I chose a light blue quilt that matched my turquoise bracelet. "When you've lived for others for so long, living for yourself feels like selfishness. But it isn't. It's justice. Justice." That word had become my personal mantra. Not justice as revenge, but justice as balance. Justice as the understanding that my well-being mattered as much as that of anyone else in my family. The physical change had been as notable as the emotional one. I had regained a healthy weight after years of not eating well to save money for other expenses. My hair, which I now had professionally styled every month, had shine and movement. My new clothes, not many but chosen with care, made me feel elegant instead of invisible. But the most important change was invisible. I had regained the ability to say no without feeling guilty. No to the unnecessary expenses that others wanted me to finance. No to the responsibilities that belonged to adults capable of managing their own lives. No to the idea that my value as a person depended on how much I could give without receiving anything in return. Mrs. Thompson remained my confidant and unofficial counselor. Every Friday afternoon, we sat in my backyard drinking coffee and discussing the week's events, like two women who had survived enough storms to appreciate the calm. "Do you know the biggest difference between the Eleanor of a year ago and the Eleanor of now?" she asked one Friday as we watched the girls play in the garden. "What is it?" "Before, you looked like a woman who apologized for existing. Now, you look like a woman who knows she has the right to be here." She was right. For decades, I had lived as if my presence in the world were a nuisance that I had to compensate for by being useful, being helpful, being indispensable to others. Now I understood that I had value on my own, regardless of what I could give or do for others. One April afternoon, while watering the plants that had bloomed spectacularly under my renewed care, I reflected on everything I had lost and everything I had gained in this process of transformation. I had lost the illusion that family love was unconditional. I had lost the belief that sacrificing myself would automatically make me a better mother or grandmother. I had lost years of peace and well-being by not setting boundaries earlier. But I had gained much more than I had lost. I had gained respect, both from others and from myself. I had gained peace of mind and physical health. I had gained the freedom to make decisions based on my own desires and needs. I had gained more authentic family relationships, built on mutual respect instead of economic dependence. And I had gained something I didn't know I had lost: hope for the future. For the first time in years, when I thought about the years I had left to live, I saw possibilities instead of just obligations. I saw trips to take, books to read, friendships to cultivate, projects to undertake. Helen and I were planning a trip to Europe for the following year. We were going to visit Italy, the country of our ancestors, and see the towns our families had emigrated from a century ago. It was a dream we had shared since we were young, but had abandoned when family responsibilities consumed all our emotional and economic resources. Now it was possible because I had learned that taking care of myself wasn't selfishness. It was necessity. It was survival. It was the only way to have something authentic to give to the people I truly loved. The sun was setting behind the peach trees when I finished watering the plants. The golden light of the afternoon made my little garden look like an oasis, a refuge of beauty and tranquility that I had created with my own hands and protected with my own decisions. I went into the house and poured myself a glass of the wine I saved for special occasions. Although I had learned that any peaceful afternoon was a special enough occasion, I sat in my living room, and silently toasted the woman who had found the courage to defend herself when no one else would. To the woman who had learned that she didn't have to buy love with money or sacrifice. To the woman who had discovered that she deserves respect simply for existing. And if you who are listening have lived through something similar, if you have felt that your love and generosity have been taken for granted, if you have ever had to choose between your well-being and the comfort of others, let me ask you something. Do you know someone who has gone through a situation similar to mine? Tell me in the comments if you or someone close to you has had to set difficult but necessary family boundaries. And if this story touched your heart, if you think it can help someone who needs to hear that they deserve respect and dignity, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Perhaps your action will help this message reach someone who, like me a year ago, needs to remember that it is never too late to choose to live with dignity.